day. This semester I've learned more about immigration policy than any person could absorb in years of watching cable news or reading the New York Times. This semester I've reached one of those magical moments that where a student kind of realizes that their worldview rests on pudding. And it's in that moment where a student finds himself questioning the status quo, questioning those in power, and learning why the world isn't as rosy as it always appears. So I'm not an undocumented immigrant, but I've read story after story about the lives of immigrants living in the U.S. and dreaming of life in the U.S. And these stories show complex lives, and these are never reported. Instead, we're delivered the same rhetoric year after year, decade after decade. Illegal immigrants are taking our jobs. It's their fault I'm not making more money. It's their fault I can't find a job. Immigrants are the cause of all the crime, even though immigrants commit crime at a rate much lower than citizens do. It's no coincidence that these claims are emphasized loudest during periods of economic difficulty. When the middle class begins to suffer due to a poor economy or a recession, the anti-immigrant rhetoric is re-energized year after year. But as we all know the truth, that unless your family's fully Native American, we're all immigrants or the descendants of immigrants. And historically, certain groups of immigrants are favored over others. So this brings me to point one. People are not born illegal. It is our laws that make them illegal. During the 1960s, new immigration laws redefined U.S. relations with Mexico. Prior to 1968, there was no cap on Mexican immigration to the U.S. The Immigration and Naturalization Act reshaped U.S. laws by establishing a preference system of who was and who was not allowed to come to the U.S. These immigration laws were designed by country or by region, and these limited the amount of Latino immigrants allowed to enter the U.S. Mexicans had to compete with other Latinos and Cubans for 120,000 visas a year. Now, due to a poor economy and high unemployment in the 1970s, this number was dropped even lower to just 20,000 visas for Mexicans and Latin Americans. As legal immigration was restrained, undocumented immigration became the main way for Mexicans to enter the U.S. In addition, U.S. involvement in the Mexican economy and the adoption of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, restructured Mexico's economy. And this encouraged or forced some Mexicans to seek new opportunities in America. However, with few legal visas available, many Mexicans who did attempt to work in the U.S. were forced to come without legal documentation. It is our laws that make people illegal. This brings me to point two. I say undocumented. Stop using the phrase illegal immigrant or illegal alien. It is dehumanizing and degrading. Immigrants, especially Latinos, are regarded as criminals, as aliens, as welfare queens, as breeders, and as terrorists. This language is offensive and dehumanizing. This language does not address the complex lives that immigrants lead. It leads us into an us versus them mentality, into the good versus bad, the rebel alliance versus the empire, Team Edward versus Team Jacob. In American society, it's easy to criminalize Mexican and Latino immigrants. It is the historical practice of America. It is our history. We allow our media and our politicians to form the discussion on immigration. And they form the discussion as an apocalyptic battle for the souls of America and the protections of our liberty, our safety, and our families. Now, doesn't that sound just a little bit hyperbolic? When we as individuals follow politicians and pundits and let them refer to immigrants as illegal, we perpetuate the hate and the misinformation. When we allow politicians to whine about the dangers of anchor babies without calling them out on their lies, we give up on the truth and let the loudest and the most insane run the discussion. There's no such thing as anchor babies. Pregnant immigrants don't have their children in America to steal benefits and get on welfare. They have their children here because it's where they live, because it's where they call home, because it's where they know their child will have access to a good education. This brings me to point three. Starting in the 1980s, the U.S. government heavily militarized the border to protect Americans from the dangers of Mexico and Mexicans seeking employment in America. This border was socially constructed as a battlefield where outgunned Border Patrol officers hold the line, heroically defending America from foreign alien invaders, drug smugglers, you name it. Now, this almost sounds like an exciting summer movie, until you realize that these are people, not aliens. Poor people, people looking for work, reuniting with family members already in the US, or seeking education and political freedom. These are people, not aliens. The constant threat of illegal immigration, coupled with anti-immigrant xenophobia, creates and reproduces this racist imagery about undocumented immigrants. And it's that imagery that becomes part of our national discourse and the discussions of immigration policies. As a result, our politicians, our reporters, they ignore individual and family motivations for immigration. And the general public continues to view immigrants as invading aliens, encroaching on American land and resources. It is our public discourse, our historical practices of immigration, and our actions of the government and our Border Patrol that have shaped and reshaped our views on the border. I am not an immigrant. I'm a US citizen. But I recognize the need to treat everyone in this country, documented or undocumented, as human beings, with inalienable, unchangeable, irreversible human rights. I do not speak Spanish, but I know the value of bilingual education. Who doesn't want to learn another language? I'm not a gay man, but I recognize the need to treat our gay, lesbian, and transgender brothers and sisters as human beings and as friends. Because they are our friends, our neighbors, and our family. We cannot continue to isolate and marginalize people simply because they are not legally recognized. We need to recognize them and protect their rights. If an undocumented immigrant has no legal rights and a gay or lesbian citizen doesn't share the same rights as heterosexuals, then the rights we claim to love and protect are, to me, meaningless. What good are our legal protections if they fail to protect the most vulnerable in our society? If a student cannot obtain a college education or a job because they are undocumented, then we have told that student, you are not equal, and you don't count, and you are not human. And we marginalize them, and we ostracize them, and we take a committed student and we throw them on the streets. And we tell them, you don't count because you are not legally recognized. In America, it is not simply the haves and the have-nots. It's the haves and the bin hads. The people who think that illegal immigrants are the cause of all their problems, the people who think that Latinos and ethnic studies are the dangers to safety in our schools and our racial relations, these people have never sat in on a class on ethnic studies. After 16 years of education in Tucson, I recognize the need to protect ethnic studies and protect the rights of the most vulnerable. In honor of International Human Rights Day, I say, treat others the way you want to be treated. Thank you. That's all I had.